Assalamu alaikum.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. فقال الله تعالى بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. Today's khutbah is the sixth in a series of khutbahs based upon and inspired by a beautiful book written by Professor Joel Hayward, The Leadership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the sixth chapter is the common touch, which basically means that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dealt with the people as he was just one of them. In fact, we know in a hadith that someone had come from outside to meet with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he walks in and he sees a group of people sitting around and he just cannot find what he was looking for. So he said, "Where is Muhammad?" And they pointed, "Here he is." He was expecting that he will be somebody totally different from them, sitting on a high pedestal, wearing kingly robes and so forth. The Prophet ﷺ was an extraordinary man, as we all know, but he chose to live like an ordinary man. It was by choice. The Quran mentions in Surah Yasin, "Ana basharun mislukum yuha ilayya." I am just like another human being, just like you. But I get the divine inspiration. So here we have this dichotomy of a person who is both a prophet of Allah, the last prophet, and at the same time who is a common man, who has a common touch, who deals with common people like common people do. So I'm quoting Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, undoubtedly had the common touch, the ability to relate and appeal to ordinary people from all walks of life. And this was central to his appeal as a leader. People wanted to follow him because of the rapport they felt with him. They knew he was different, of course. He was a prophet and a leader with scrupulously righteous conduct. But he never adopted an air of superiority and seemed in many ways to be a normal man with ordinary interest who smiled and cried at or liked and disliked many of the same things as everyone else does. And as I mentioned, that his style of living like a common man was by choice. So we have a hadith narrated by Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The hadith is from Musnad Imam Ahmad and it is an authentic hadith. And Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu قال جلس جبريل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فنظر إلى السماء فإذا ملك ينزل. But one day the Prophet ﷺ was sitting and Jibreel ﷺ with him, and then he looked at the sky and saw an angel descending. So قال جبريل إن هذا الملك ما نزل منذ يوم خلق قبل الساعة. That this is an angel who has never come down to this planet since the day he was created. So obviously he has come with a very important message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A message not related to the wahi, because Jibreel ﷺ was conveying the wahi, which also means that there are many other angels. And some of the angels did come down to the Prophet ﷺ, not bringing the wahi, but some other messages. So here is the message. فَلَمَّا نَزَلَ قَالَ يَا مُحَمَّدْ صلى الله عليه وسلم أَرْسَلَنِي إِلَيْكَ رَبُّكَ قال أفملكا نبيا يجعلك أو عبدا رسولا. They say, Ya Muhammad, your Rabb has sent me to you. It's a special message. And he said, I'm giving you a choice, O Muhammad. If you like, I can make you a king, prophet, or if you prefer, I will make you a prophet who is just a slave, like another human being. قال جبريل تواضع لربك يا محمد. So Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam said that be humble before your Rabb, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The Prophet said قال بل عبدا رسولا. He said, if I have the choice between the two, then I would prefer to be a servant of Allah and his messenger, not a king. So he could have become the king, and we have examples of prophets who were kings, Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, Dawud alayhi salatu wasalam. But the Prophet chose to be Abd. And if you read the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the Prophet several times in several verses as Abd. Subhanallazi asra bi abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa. In fact, there is a hadith in which Aisha radiallahu ta'ala is reporting that the Prophet used to wake up in the middle of the night for tahajjud and used to pray very long prayers, standing up. And one night she saw that his feet were actually swollen because of the time he was spending standing. So she said, O Prophet ﷺ, and she quoted the verse of the Quran that Allah has already forgiven your previous and mistakes that might occur, meaning that why do you have to go to this trouble? And he said, shouldn't I become Abdan Shakura? He again used the word Abd. Shouldn't I become a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is most appreciative of Allah's ni'mah on me? So he never became arrogant. He never said, I'm forgiven. I have free passage to Jannah. Why should I be engaged in this thing? So now we'll talk about his community involvement. This is the main topic, the common touch, not just as a messenger, not a military leader, not as a political leader of his community, but a member of his community who chose this role to be a common man with common people. And as I recall, unfortunately, we had an imam at Worcester Islamic Center, it's no longer there, Imam Asif. He actually followed in the prophetic footsteps by being a common person. He was an imam, but he used to go out and watch movies. He used to play cricket, volleyball, football, whatever he could play. Just being part of the community. People would see you. So he didn't remain aloof from them. So the certain activities which the Prophet ﷺ not only participated himself, but he organized those activities. And this is a part of his character, his life, that doesn't get as much attention and highlight in the books of Sirah or even Ahadith, although there are. So one example, and there are several examples, and we'll go through them, which are quoted by the Professor. One is wrestling. The Prophet ﷺ was a wrestler as well. So what's the connection between being a wrestler and a prophet? Okay, so we'll look at it, inshallah. So hadith come from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala about a person, his name was Yazid bin Rukana. And Yazid was like the Gama Pelwan, you can think. He was the biggest wrestler. Nobody had ever pitched him to his back to the ground. He didn't want to accept the message of the Prophet. In fact, was an enemy of the Prophet. He was a distant relative as well. And the Prophet kept giving him the message, and he wouldn't accept it. So the Prophet said, what would it take for me to convince you? Now think about it from the mindset of this man. He is a wrestler. Nobody has ever beaten him. And go back to the Quran when Musa ﷺ was debating with Fir'aun. Fir'aun didn't have anything to challenge Musa ﷺ, so he called the magicians and said, fight them. Magic with magic. And magicians were the first people to accept Islam. They had not even heard the message of Musa ﷺ in detail. But because he was able to overcome them, they say, no other magician, no human being can do this. It has to be something extraordinary. They recognized it. So Yazid bin Rukana's answer was, well, if you are really a prophet, then you should be able to beat me in wrestling. I'm so good, I don't think you can beat me. That was his mindset. So the Prophet فَسَرَعُ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاث مرات كل مرة على مئة من الغنم. So the Prophet ﷺ wrestled with him 3 times, and each time there was a bet of 100 sheep. So Rukana not only thought that he could beat the Prophet ﷺ, he said, let me capitalize. I am strong, he cannot beat me. So 100 sheep again, 3 times. After the 3rd time he says, Kala ya Muhammad, Ma wada dhahri ilal ardi ahadun qablaka. Before you, no one has ever put my back on the ground, even once you have done it 3 times. This was enough for him. This was his moment of reckoning, awakening, and realization that he was not dealing with an ordinary wrestler. It has to be something in him. And he accepted Islam at that time. Now what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He returned a sheep to him, 300 sheep. The idea that I'm trying to convey in the lesson that I learned myself is that in whatever activities he indulged in as a member of the community, his idea was to communicate his message and bring people to the right path. He was not interested in showing that he was a bigger wrestler than Rukana. He was not interested in 300 sheep that he won. He had achieved his purpose. Rukana had come to Islam. Good enough. I don't need your sheep. So he returned it to them. But at the same time, he also gave another message. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala mentions, Anna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam qala, Laysa shadidu bisur'a, innama shadidu alladhi yamliku nafsahu indal ghadab. A lesson for us. That the strong person is not the one who can overcome the people by his strength. And actually sur'a means wrestling as well. But the strong is the one who controls himself while anger. Another message that we can learn is that wrestling is part of the sunnah, and it is a means of strengthening the body. The Prophet's emphasis in the activities which he organized and the sports activities that he participated, and we'll read more about it. The idea was to strengthen the Muslims and be ready. There was no standing army during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. If an enemy attacked, every able man has to participate, which means that you had to be prepared all the time, because it was a tribal society. You could be attacked anytime. Muslims were living in fear in a way. They had to be prepared. So he arranged activities that will keep the Muslims strong and fit. I will come to that. But he also emphasized that the real strength is not physical strength or overcoming the weak people and exploiting them, but we should use our strength, physical, academic, financial, anything that we have been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit mankind. The next is camel and horse races. When we read the seerah, we have to interpret it according to the culture of that time. If the Prophet ﷺ was in this day and age here, it will not be camel and horse races, it will be something else. But during that period of time, he utilized whatever means were available at his disposal to teach lessons and to prepare the Muslims. So the hadith comes, it's the golden chain of Imam Malik an Nafi an Abdullah bin Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sabaqa bain al-khayl allati uzmirat min al-hafya wa amduha taniyatul wada وسابق بين الخيل التي لم تزمر من الثنية إلى مسجد بني زريق وأن عبد الله بن عمر كان في من سابق بها. So Abdullah bin Umar is mentioning that the Prophet actually organized the horse races, and he divided the race into two components. One was the horses which were trained, so they will be able to run like 500 yard or whatever races we have, and the other was horses which were not trained. So you can see that in any community or in any army, there are people who are one step ahead of the others. You cannot have put all of them in one category and say you have to run, the others run. So he divided them into two categories. People who are trained to run horses, people who are not trained to run horses. Now, Thaniyatul Wada, we will recognize Tala al Badru Alayna min Thaniyatul Wada. It was a place outside of Medina. And Abdullah bin Umar radiyallahu ta'ala himself participated. He was a young man at that time. Professor Howland actually mentions, and I couldn't find it from any of the books, that the Prophet actually paid the winners out of his own pocket. So he gave the awards not from the community's money, but his own pocket. Now, another incident is a kind of beautiful incident that if you happen to be the leader of your community, there's something called, I would call it in Urdu, siyasi aqidat. There is a religious aqidat where you consider that the person that you like, your religious scholar, is the best. You don't want to hear anything bad about it. And similarly, there is political aqidat. And no matter what your political leader does, you will always support him. You never want to see him beaten. And if somebody did it, you will be very, very upset. With this background, the hadith is from Anas radiyallahu ta'ala. He said, Kana li Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam naqatun tusamma al-adba la tusbaku. The Prophet sallallahu had a she-camel, and her name was Adba. She was a very swift, fast-moving one. No other camel could beat her. Okay? So she had won all the races. But then something happened. Fajaha Arabi ala qawudin. An Arabi from outside came, and he was riding on a camel called qawud. In Arabic language, there are hundreds of words for camels and sword. Each one has its own characteristic and subtlety. So qawud is a camel which is less than 6 years old. So they named camels according to certain qualities, according to their ages, how fast they could move something. So he came and his camel beat Adba. How could that happen? How could the she-camel of Messenger of Allah lose this thing? So فَشَقَّ ذَلِكَ عَلَى الْمُسْلِمِينَ. It was very hard for the Muslims to accept it, that an outsider comes and his camel beats the camel of the Prophet ﷺ. فَعَرَفَ. The Prophet ﷺ actually recognized this tension on the faces of his followers. He seized upon that opportunity to teach a lesson. In English, the lesson is, what goes up must come down. So in Arabic he said, Haqqun alallahi. It is the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah tarfi'a shay'un min ad-dunya illa wadahu. That nothing of this dunya goes up except that Allah can bring it down. And And this is a lesson for us as well. That in America there is no, or even in the world you can say, there is no country or no corporation that is too big to fail. And there is a lesson here. I learned this thing, no organization is too big to fail in 2008 when the financial crisis came. At that time, Enron, if I remember correctly, the valuation of Enron at that time was 95 billion. I may be wrong. If somebody recalls, please correct me. 95 billion at the time could have been even $1 trillion at this time. But that fell down. Just last year, there was the sixth largest bank in America, in California, that fell. Nothing is too big to fail. Nothing is too great to fall. It can happen to anybody. The lesson that I learned from these incidents and some other incidents is that if you are working for a company, Apple, Amazon, Google, don't think that they will never fail. So don't put all your 401k in the stock of that company only. People have lost a lot of money when it happens. Diversified. I'm not a financial advisor. There are people who are more knowledgeable about it, but there is a lesson to learn about it. So an ordinary leader and his followers would never allow such a thing to happen. If someone excelled him, he would be in big trouble. But the Prophet ﷺ took every opportunity to teach wisdom to his people. The next thing is archery. When I did some research on it, I found 40 ahadith related to archery and the Prophet ﷺ's emphasis on learning archery. So again, go back to the culture of that time, no standing army, people have to fight for themselves. Everyone, when you are in a battle, everyone is fighting for himself or herself. And they were fighting with swords. So he took the opportunity to teach a lesson in a khutbah. So if you read the khutbahs of the Prophet ﷺ, or if you read the books of hadith, they were not all about how to perform wudu and how to make salat and this and that. He looked at the events, current events, and he took that opportunity to highlight certain things for that. So again, the khatib, the people who give speeches, sermons, should be very well aware of the world around them and talk about the current affairs too. So, but just by reading it, reading between the lines, you can think that, and the Prophet ﷺ realized that Muslims are going to be attacked and how to prepare. So while delivering a sermon from the pulpit, he said, prepare to meet them with as much strength as you can afford. Verily strength lies in archery, verily strength lies in archery, verily strength lies in archery. Umar radiallahu ta'ala also used to tell people that teach your children the art of archery, fighting with the sword, and swimming. And again, all of these were aimed at strengthening the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ intuitively knew that his best hope for building an effective leader-follower relationship with others was to create an egalitarian society in which everyone would benefit from the growing prosperity of his polity and in which they all saw him among them and had easy access to them. So 3 things that we can learn from the statement is that, number 1, when a country is doing well or when an organization is doing well, there is more prosperity. You can say per capita income has gone up. People are happy, living happily, no problem. But if you dissect it further, you find that most of the benefit of that growing prosperity is in the hands of a few people. It's not that if Elon Musk has now $250 billion, that everyone who works for his company is also a billionaire or millionaire. The growing prosperity, unfortunately, does not translate to everybody or to the grassroots. It's the top 1% who always benefit, and the gulf between those who have and those who do not have keeps widening every time. So be very careful about that. The second thing was that he lived among them, he did not live aloof. And third thing, everybody had easy access to them. There was no email in those days, but anybody could go and knock at his door. People would go and even shout loudly from outside. And Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this fact of how to be respectful to the Prophet ﷺ. But at a human level, he allowed it. You can come to me anytime you want. Nothing. So that's again endears the people. The second thing is that while dealing with people, he actually realized if they had some sort of a disability. And we have a TV over here. So one day the Prophet ﷺ was walking, and a woman who suffered from this, our historian mentioned, from a mental issue, she called out to him very loudly and telling him that she needed something from him. I think that she probably had a hearing problem, because the hadith mentioned that he replied very softly to her. Now, if somebody's shouting at you, the natural reaction is to shout back. But I realized in my profession, I see a lot of people who have a hard time hearing. If you speak loudly and quickly, they won't be able to understand it. But if you sit very close to them and speak to them very softly, they may be able to read your lips and they can understand. So the Prophet ﷺ actually realized that, so there's two streets, so he speaks very softly and says, "Mother." He's addressing her as mother. She said, "Tell me on which side of the street you would prefer me to speak with you so that I can do what is best for you." So he wants to make sure which ear she can hear better, so that he can go to her and listen to what she wants and he can do for it. That sort of understanding of the needs of his people is something that endears him, but we don't hear these things or read about these things, but they're not highlighted in this way. So أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولذكر الله أكبر. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. One thing that I want to mention is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assigned 1/5 khumus of the war booty to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's in Quran. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not keep that 20% for himself or his family. He actually would give away from that as well. In fact, there is a hadith which comes during the lifetime of the caliphate of Umar radiallahu ta'ala while he was addressing Abbas radiallahu ta'ala and Ali radiallahu ta'ala and others, and he said, you know, even though the Prophet ﷺ was assigned 20%, he would give it away. When Banu Nadir left, Prophet ﷺ got 1/5 of what they had left behind. He gave all of it away. So as a leader, he didn't want to have an extra privilege, but I want to tell you a few things. We Americans have a very beautiful legal system of rewarding our presidents when they finish their office. It's all legal. I'm not saying it's illegal, but I will share some figures with you without making any comments. President Obama, ex-President Obama, in December of 2007, Money Magazine estimated his net worth at 1.3 million, 2007, before he took office. After he was in office for 2 terms between 2009 and 2017, his net worth at that time was 70 million. He was only president. His salary was $400,000 per year, but his net worth increased from 1.3 million to 70 million, and now it is worth 250 million. And he charges close to $500,000 to give a speech for 1 hour, 400 and something thousand. Majority of Americans do not earn this much money as their annual salary. Okay? It's all legal. Bill Clinton, his net worth was again 1.3 million before he took office. When he ended his second term, his net worth was $120 million. Now he's worth $241 million. The figures which I have from 2016 of how much he and Hillary Clinton were charging to give a speech. Clinton was charging $260,000 for a 1 hour speech, 2016, and his wife was charging $226,000 for 1 hour speech. We also invited her. Jimmy Carter, his salary was $200,000 a year while he was in office. He just passed away at the age of 100. What are the benefits which they get? So he received $551,000 for fiscal year 2024. He was in hospice at that time. That included $236,000 in pension benefits, $118,000 for office space. But he was not in office. He was at home in hospice. And $173,000 for contracted personal compensation and benefits, in addition to $236,000 in pension, all legal. Bill Clinton gets $222,000 in personal compensation and benefits, $255,000 in pension, and $661,000 for office space. He's an attorney with his own office, he charges, but the government also pays him $661,000 for office space. Good. George Bush, he received $1.3 million in 2024 for benefits, $224,000 for his staff, $255,000 pension benefits. He had no travel budget, but he received $542,000 for office space, $124,000 for communications and utilities, and tens of thousands more for other costs. Obama got $605,000 last year, plus millions from making speeches. I will not make any comments about this thing. But if you look at the lifestyle of the Prophet ﷺ and his Khulafa and how much they got, you can understand what I'm trying to tell you. So without belaboring this fact, we have to make dua for Sister Fahmida Yasmin's father, Muhammad Fazlul Haq, who passed away last Friday. It was a day of Friday. So make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma اغفر لنا لحينا وميتنا وصغيرنا وكبيرنا وذكرنا وأنثانا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him the highest place in Jannatul Firdaus, forgive his sins and give patience to his family. We also have to make dua that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala end the war that has been going on in Gaza and let peace prevail over there. We also make dua for all of those who are passed away in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, Sudan, Syria. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our brothers and sisters for any of their shortcomings and mistakes of this world. May He grant them peace in the grave, expanding it for them and protecting them from its trials and tribulations. May He raise them amongst those who are righteous, those who are patient, and those who are truthful, and those who believe. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them and grant all of us shade on the day when there is no shade but that of His throne. May He grant all of us entrance into Jannah without any judgment. May all of us dwell in Jannah in the company of all those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and those who love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide and bless all of us and cover and protect all of our progeny and our children. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
La ilaha illallah. Make your line straight. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألم نشرح لك صدرك